If you tried to build the rifle that I have in my hand, you would have committed a felony, most likely. Unless there's some special circumstances and some extra check boxes that you checked off on your list. And I know from a surface level, this rifle just looks like a normal rifle, but it has an extra position on that safety, and that makes this one a machine gun. And today, we're gonna talk a little bit about machine guns. I think by now people are probably gonna say, Jared, you are obsessed with machine guns. And I understand why you say that, because for the past 8 years of my life, as I've been in the quote unquote gun industry, as dumb as that word is, but I've been in the gun industry, I have talked about select fire weapons. I've talked about SBRs and suppressors and all of the NFA regulated arms that I think you should be able to freely own. And because of that, I think a lot of people think I just go to bed and I think about machine guns, and I wake up in the morning and brush my teeth and the first thing I think about is machine guns, and I'm getting a shower and I'm thinking machine guns, driving to work, machine guns, you know, shopping for groceries for the family, more machine guns. But it's not like that for me. I don't think about machine guns, I don't obsess over machine guns, but I like to use them as a topic and a talking point because it is such a radically different style of firearm than what people would typically agree is within their rights. And let me just kind of give you an example of that. If I say you have a right to own a pistol and carry it concealed, there's very few people that would actually say that should not be allowed by the law, that you do not actually have the right to do that. Very, very few people in this country would say, yeah, you don't have the right to protect yourself with a sidearm. When we start getting into rifles, there's some people that are like, yeah, we don't want rifles because we think they're assault weapons and you shouldn't be able to freely own them. But again, most people are gonna say, yeah, sure, you can carry a rifle or have a rifle or own a rifle, things like that. And yeah, defending your life is a human right. So we're good with that. When we start talking machine guns, that's when people start to lose it. That's when you start to see who is truly in line with our human rights, who understands our rights, and who does not understand our rights. And it's funny because in 2015, 16, 17, when I was talking about machine guns, inside the gun industry, I saw a very strange reality. And that reality is there's a whole lot of people that have transferable machine guns that are worth $20, $30, $40, $50, $100,000 that frankly do not want to see machine guns deregulated because they are concerned more about their investment than they would be about our human right to own the guns that the government owns. So that reality alone was enough of a shock to me to want to start researching into the topic of machine guns and understanding why I can't just go purchase this gun over the counter like every other firearm simply because it continues to fire with one press or one function of the trigger. And because of that, I've done a lot of content on this topic. Now, in years past, I focused on SBRs, SBSs, suppressors, things like that. But I do really think that it's way past time that we start understanding how our rights were stripped, how we got to the point where the government was even able to pass the NFA, and what the reality of the times were, and the history surrounding this. Because I think often we are, quite frankly, ignorant of the history that brings us up to the points of where we're at. And because of that, we've launched a ton of content over the last couple weeks and the last couple months on the various channels covering topics like machine guns. So I would encourage you all, after this video is done, after we talk a little bit about a brief history of machine guns and why you can't own them, I think you should check out the videos we just did at TA Targets. So I'm gonna put links down in the description. We'll put a card right here above my head to take you to one of those videos. Put some in the end card as well. We did a lot talking about our rights, and I dove in depth in a blog post as well describing how we went from being able to purchase machine guns over the counter with no background checks, no paperwork, no permission slip at all. You just went to the place that sold the guns. If you wanted a machine gun, you paid for it, and you freaking walked out the door with a gun that nobody knew about. We went from that reality to now it's illegal to manufacture new machine guns. And if you want a machine gun, you got to purchase one that was registered, manufactured, and originally registered under the NFA prior to May 19th of 1986. So that's why they are so collectible. So let's kind of start with a little bit of a brief history here and why I think that this is important. And I'm not gonna go all in depth on this video because I covered it in previous videos, but I do wanna breeze through this. So prior to 1934, it was 100% legal to purchase, own, use machine guns. And frankly, they were in common use by Americans at that time. Now, were they the most popular rifles or pistols or shotguns or whatever else? No, they weren't. They were not owned in mass by the populace compared to other styles of rifles, but they were commonly owned because you had every right to own them. And the Second Amendment makes that very clear, although people will argue that. So when people argue about the Second Amendment and the fact that it says well regulated, I point back to the 1776 Pennsylvania Constitution that lays out our firearm rights. And then again in 1790, Pennsylvania ratified a new constitution, and I'm going to quote that one for you because it's important. Keep in mind, Pennsylvania Constitution existed about a decade before the Republic was even founded. But in 1790, we added a clause, or I should say, updated the right to bear arms inside of our Constitution. And it says, the right of the citizens to bear arms in defense of themselves and the state shall not be questioned. So that is the reality of firearm rights. They should not be questioned by the government. The government should not have the right to regulate the arms of the populace, because the only reason we created this structure of government to begin with was to protect us from the government. So it makes absolutely no sense to me to say governments are evil and they tend to become corrupted and they tend to abuse their people. But let's let them regulate the tool that we might need to be able to correct their course in a last-ditch effort to be able to remain free. I'm not buying it. The founders didn't buy it. All the documents, history, and like I said, the Pennsylvania State Constitution of 1790 doesn't buy it either, does not pass that test. But somewhere along the way, we lost our rights. So as we get into the early 1900s, and keep in mind, this is right before World War II, there's a whole bunch of changes happening in this country. And the early 1900s are a new age of regulation that occurred inside of the United States. It's a new age of all kinds of crazy stuff, but don't get me wrong, the 1800s had their fair share of gun control as well. And it's ironic to me that in an age only about 100 years after the founding of our nation, we already forgot a lot of the principles of this nation, and no doubt because the founders would have long died since then. So you didn't have the people around you that made the country to teach you about the country. This is why I think it's so important culturally for us to be passing down these rights and this knowledge to our children and next of kin. But in the early 1900s, the government decided we're gonna pass the Volstead Act, the 18th Amendment. We're outlawing alcohol. We're gonna ban alcohol nationwide. What it created was organized crime as we know it today. So you've got this increase in crime that occurred through the early 1900s, from around 1919 through the late 1920s. And naturally, people just completely disobeyed the government when it came to prohibition. There were speakeasies, people were selling moonshine, moonshining became a big thing. There was a whole criminal enterprise that was extremely wealthy that was built simply because the government said, alcohol bad, make it illegal. But what's really ironic about that time period is people picketed for the right to consume alcohol. Now, sit on that thought for a moment. People literally hit the streets in mass to protest the government telling them they can't drink alcohol.
Give me a drink, will you?
Bar's closed.
Just a beer.
The bar's
A
closed.
beer's not drinking.
Before we get started,
Would
I'd like
you
to
sit
make
down, Doctor, please? It'd destroy me. Give me a
Bar's closed.
Hey, no, give me a
Bar's
drink.
closed. According to Mr. Stoddard, the bar's closed. Anything further on the election?
No, legally, the election's finished.
Then the bar is open.
But only a few short years later, the government said, oh, holy cow, we've got all this crime. Well, one, we're gonna repeal the 18th Amendment with the 21st Amendment, and we're gonna make alcohol legal again and create tax schemes and regulatory schemes, but I digress. But at the same time, there's still all this crime that we created. So oopsie, sorry guys that there's more violence now than ever, but we're gonna just make machine guns and stuff illegal because that seems to be the best thing that we could do. And honestly, I'm joking about this, but that's what the government ended up doing. And I used this example in the previous video on TA Targets that it's almost like the government broke our legs and then forced us to buy a wheelchair and crutches. And if we decided not to, they'd just break our arms as a punishment. So what I'm explaining here is the government created the problem led to crime. Their solution to crime was repealing the initial thing that they made illegal, but at the same time, the crime was already established, so their further action was, hey, let's just ban anything that's scary. And because the gangsters at the time were running around with machine guns because it was perfectly legal to have them, they were accessible, you could buy them over the counter, you could order them from freaking Sears if you wanted to. and Tommy guns were plentiful, people were scared of them. So naturally, they begged the government for more control. So now, just pit those two things against each other and understand that we, in one hand, had alcohol illegal, people picketing and saying, I want my rights back. And then over here, machine guns, now illegal, or being talked about to be made illegal, or at least very hard to own. Seemingly nobody complained. Nobody stood in the streets picketing for the rights to own select fire. And again, this is because our populace did not understand where our republic would end up. And so we got complacent and lazy. We didn't think that it was a big deal. Look, I fell into the traps of that years and years ago before I was into modern arms, and I really kind of reframed my mind. I wasn't worried about gun control because guns to me at that time when I was younger were for hunting. But I know better now, and I'm teaching my next of kin, my children, about this as well, and you should be too. But as we move forward from the 21st Amendment being passed and the debates for the NFA going into place, originally the NFA was supposed to ban handguns along with the machine guns and short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns. And ironically, before the NFA, SBRs and SBSs didn't exist because a rifle was a rifle and a shotgun was a shotgun, regardless of the barrel length. But now all of a sudden we've got these different lengths and cyclic rates and all these different restrictions that are happening to guns. And what the NFA did was it made anything that fell under the classification of the NFA a regulated weapon that needed a $200 tax stamp paid for each single gun or suppressor or anything they determined as an NFA firearm. Every single one needed that $200 tax paid. You had to register it with the federal government. You're gonna get fingerprinted and photographed. And the federal government knows for every single NFA weapon that you own, all the specs, all the details, serial numbers, all of that. It is effectively registered with the government. So from 1934 onward, any machine guns that you wanted to own, registered, tax stamp paid, but as a normal person, you could still own them. But a $200 tax back in 34 was around $4,000 in today's money. Very pricey, very expensive. So very cost prohibitive for a normal American. Now that $200 tax stamp exists to this day, but in 1968, the Gun Control Act added further regulations to the ownership and transfer of machine guns, especially ones that were not yet registered, and it eliminated the pathway to be able to do that. It got even worse in '86 with the passing of the Firearm Owners Protection Act, which I always laugh at when I think about it, and the Hughes Amendment to that act, which, again, looking back at history, this is why this stuff is so important. The Hughes Amendment was never a written down vote. It was a verbal vote that was spoken and then added to the bill as if it was law. So just keep those kinds of things in mind. And that's why so many people don't even know anything about the Hughes Amendment. But what the Hughes Amendment did, from that date of enactment, any machine gun that is manufactured after May 19th of 1986, there is zero, and I'm talking zero, pathway for you as a normal citizen to gain legal ownership to that weapon. So what's the big deal with that? Well, there's this little pesky thing called supply and demand. So even up through the 70s and 80s, because there weren't further restrictions on machine guns, they were plentiful and inexpensive. Think about it this way: if an AR-15 is semi-auto versus an AR-15 like this, that is select fire, there's literally one component that's different inside of these. There's a second sear and a pin and a spring for that. Other than that, they are identical. So cost of manufacturing from a machine gun to a semi-auto is virtually nothing different. So you should be able to buy a semi-auto and a select fire for almost the same price. But when you limit the amount of machine guns that exist, what you effectively do is create a supply and demand issue where now the ones that exist out in the wild are far and few between, and the people that own them don't want to get rid of them. So when they do sell, there's very low supply, high demand, and they sell for a premium. That's why you see MP5s and other firearms going for 50 grand or more sometimes. And to me, that is the biggest theft of all. The 34 NFA was bad enough. 68 Gun Control Act, bad enough. But when we got to 86, that's when the government went full tyranny and said, you can't even own new machine guns. Unless you're a SOT, you have the right FFL and the right paperwork, or you're just a red-blooded American that doesn't talk about it. Because at the end of the day, you can drill a 1/8 inch hole in the right lower, add a second sear, you're good. You're good to go. Can't recommend that you do that because you're committing a felony. But regardless, it's not hard. It's not like this is a complicated thing. but they stole that right away from you. And that's why I'm so frustrated by it. And that's why I want to talk about it so much. So am I really obsessed with machine guns? I don't think it's an obsession with machine guns. It's an obsession with a concept. If the government owns select fire and they own weapons, and we agree that the Second Amendment is supposed to be a balance against a tyrannical government, people often think, oh, that means engaging in fighting the government. And at some point, it does mean that. However, the sheer existence of citizenry owning guns like this makes it a peaceful transaction inside of our country because it stops it from ever getting to a violent point. So yes, Second Amendment is the fail-safe to say if you have to engage in combat against tyranny, that's what you do. The Second Amendment is there for that. It's not for hunting. A side benefit of the Second Amendment is self-defense. That's not the main point. But the fact that it exists is why we have peace in this nation, typically. But because our populace is lazy, we don't want to own our rights, we don't want to fight for our rights, we get abused by our government slowly through tax and register schemes like the NFA. So I'm not obsessed with machine guns, but I do believe that if they own it, we should own it. It's a simple balance of power. If you know that the Postal Service is rolling around with 240 Bravos, I want to have a 240 Bravo. If they have armored Hiluxes for some reason, I want to have one of them. If they have body armor, I want to own it. Lasers, night vision, thermal, all of it. It's a balance of power. It's not just about the gun. This is about a cultural revival, understanding that our rights are secured and protected from the government, but it's far more than just guns. So I hope that that clarifies a little bit where my position is on machine guns. I hope that it bothers you too, because a previous generation in our nation, without your consent, before you even existed, created laws that affect us still to this day. And that's a major problem with our republic. It's one that I think we need to dive deep into at some point and restructure, reframe, and correct so that the whims of a populace that is probably retarded, honestly, should not be able to affect the outcome of my generation with a simple stroke of a pen. That pisses me off that we did that. It's a robbery of our rights. It should piss you off too. It should frustrate you, but the cool thing is we can say what we want in this country. We can speak freely. We can own guns. And I pay a whole lot of money so I can talk about machine guns like this with you guys and hopefully not get arrested for it. So guys, I hope this video was helpful for you. I hope you enjoyed it a little bit. If you want to hear more about machine guns or you want me to go over any of the builds, I kind of showed this 12.5 here, but I didn't really talk about it too much. If you want me to go over anything or talk more about this specific topic, do some blog posts, maybe some community posts, whatever, just let me know down in the comments. That's a great way to do that. The other thing I'm gonna ask is follow my page on Instagram because they freaking hate me. I'll go from like posting stories to having 5,000 views on a story to I'll post a story and 40 people will see it. Like 100% when I talk about this kind of stuff, it completely gets choked up. So my Instagram handle's right down here, I don't know where, I'll put it somewhere, but it's down here somewhere. Follow me on Instagram and engage there as well in the comments. That's a great way to boost that algorithm. And if you see posts that you like, share them. And the last thing I'm gonna ask you guys to do is check the links down in the description. I have quite a few brands that my team and I are pouring our heart, blood, sweat, tears. Anyway, we're pouring our blood, sweats, and tears into, so go down there and support us. Show us some love. All the links are down in the description. I appreciate you guys for doing that. I know it's a weird time, but you supporting us is critical to our mission. So stay well, stay safe. I'll see you in the next video.